Hi everybody, Adam Steele here. I'm at John Brown's place again, and this is my amp. This is possibly one of the most hated amps of its time, and I'm going to show you how it's really a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for. This is the Marshall Mode 4. This thing is a really impressive amp. It's got 4 channels split into 2 amps, so to speak, inside, so it's got 2 shared EQ sections, and it's solid state. What? It must be bad because it's solid state. Not so. And in another video I'm going to do in the future, this is going to be part of my ultimate guitar tone video, where I find that blending an amp like this with something that's a lot more kind of valvey can give you a really big sound. And that combination can be an absolute key to a huge tone. So this thing is a massive sound. It's a 350 watt amp, which you would think, oh no, it's going to blow my speakers up. No, it's not. It can do up to 350 watts at peak output on an 8 ohm load. We're currently using it on a 16 ohm load on a Zilla 2x12 Fat Boy, and it's something like 230, 240 watts at 16 ohms. But the thing is, you're not going to use all that wattage. What that describes is the maximum amount of power output that this thing can do. And because it's trying to keep up with 50 or 100 watt valve amps, they get a lot of their sound from saturating the valve output stage. This amp doesn't do that, so they need extra headroom on the solid state output so that it can do that kind of sound without clipping in a solid state kind of way. All that being said, it sounds pretty huge. On channel 1, which is the clean sound, it's got this really nice big kind of thing. It's got an inbuilt digital reverb as well, which is not the worst digital reverb I've heard. And this is on the neck pickup of this Mayonnaise de Velcazzi. Of course that sounds really clean, but in typical Marshall fashion, if I hit that hard, it will crunch up a little bit. So we get that. And that's with the gain just above noon. What it says in the manual for this is that there is a sweet spot in between the clean and the crunch channels, where if you go quite low gain, then the crunch channel is louder, and if you go higher, then the clean channel is louder, so you've got to kind of balance it a little bit. There's a full 3-band EQ as well, so obviously you've heard the reverb there. I'm going to turn that off. Sounds very Marshall-y. There is also a scoop button inside the EQ, which will really remove a lot of the mids, which on a clean channel I do find can be quite useful, because then you can get more of an American Fender-y kind of sound with that. So that's the one time I would use a scoop setting. This amp is very much of its time, kind of early 2000s, 2003 I think was when I started to see these being rolled out. 2003, 2004, it was around that period, because I remember seeing the band Mr. Shiraz had 2 of these, and actually they sounded amazing live because they knew how to dial in their tones. And so if we move on from the clean to the crunch, that should be... Still quite high gain. The only pedal I've got on right now is the 14 Zool gate, which is stopping this from being a noisy mess. But the EQ itself has the bass up a little, mids down a little, and the treble up a little, but we're talking small amounts. If I 12 o'clock those, and make sure the resonance and presence are both at 12 o'clock. The resonance was a little higher up there. We get this at stock on the crunch. Very classic Marshall. And so I can add a bit more resonance on the bottom, which of course you can't do on a lot of classic Marshalls. And between that and the clean, you can put a boost in front of that, and you can treat this like it was an early Marshall, like a JMP or an early JCM 800 without all the clipping and boosting. So you get that kind of... It's quite a dynamic sounding amp. Now, if we move over to the heavy side, this is where it gets interesting. So I've got the reverb and effects turned off, volume and gain are all the way at noon, and let's get the EQ nooned off as well. And then, this is OD1. Which is not as high gain as I thought it would be if I turn the gain itself up. That's got a lot more kind of to it, but it is still distinctly Marshall-esque. And that's where the tone matrix comes in, because the tone matrix on version 1 apparently is that classic Marshall sound. Now, what a lot of you might not know about guitar amps, I'm guessing a lot of you do, but just to fill in those who don't, almost every guitar amp design has a massive mid scoop in the tone stack. That's why a lot of kind of Fenders sound nice and twinkly. It's why a lot of Marshalls sound very bitey. Some of the more modern amps have less of a mid scoop, but it's still in there because otherwise just a straight guitar tone doesn't actually sound very nice at all. So that's part of the way in there, and then we get the tone stack to fine control afterwards. That's why we get the sound we get out of a lot of guitar amps. And so where that mid scoop is really helps to define. A lot of different brands have different points they like to put that mid scoop in. So the Marshall one is actually quite high, so you get that kind of low mid kind of bark. So you get this kind of... Now if I move this tone matrix, this moves us away from Marshall territory, so that this mid scoop is a little bit lower, so you get a lot of that kind of honk in the mids removed, so we get more of a modern metal sound. And if I turn the tone matrix all the way to version 3, we get much more low end, much less of that Marshall-y mid. We get more of the metal thing. And so there you go, the tone matrix, without even touching the EQ, has really changed the way the amp responds, because that's about where the gain is after the first gain stage, so it really affects how everything responds. Even though the output is still solid state, it is still a valve preamp design. Now if we kick the amount of drive up, oh, you can hear that. Oh yes, so now suddenly we're in metal territory. So I'm going to back that gain off because I don't need that much gain cascading in. And I'm going to turn the resonance back down just below noon. And there is a scoop. I'm just going to try it for a second, but it's going to sound disgusting. Yeah, the scoop button on gain channels around that time was a bad idea. It doesn't sound very good at all, but a lot of albums in the early 2000s, the producers would kind of scoop the mids in the mix afterwards to make space for things like the vocals. And so a lot of bedroom guitarists assume that that's what you would do on the amp, so people like Marshall designed the amps with these scoop buttons in. Don't touch them. Use mids. Have mids. Let the engineers deal with that later, because then they've got the mids to play with. And so instead of that horrible thing, I like to turn the mids up and get suddenly something that's got that anger and that guts, but really cuts through for that. That's sounding more like it, and I'll take the tone matrix back to 2, because what I would probably do in a mix is have a layer of this, maybe even on tone matrix 1 to give me that kind of more Marshall-y mid-focus sound, and another layer of something like the Mesa Dual Rectifier Road King, or maybe a 5150, something with more of that kind of kind of thing. So this is the tone I would blend. And if I back the gain down even further, I could use the Pandemonium boost to clear out that low end a little bit, so I still get that thug 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 thing, but only when I want it and not all the time. So that is one of the most useful amps for me, with that versatility that isn't actually a valve amp. So yeah, I'm going to be using this in the studio a lot. So thanks to John for letting me use his rig here so that I can get this filmed. And thanks to everybody at home for watching. Stick around for the ultimate guitar tone video where I'm going to be doing crazy things like 4 mics on a cab all blended together and all full analog processing to try and get the most beefy guitar tones possible. Thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you in the next video.